Welcome to the Brodart Tell Me More Around the World webinar. Today we have three amazing authors that will be sharing their stories. Our moderator is Dodie Owens. Dodie has a classic library science background and an entrepreneurial spirit. She worked with big name authors, major publishing houses, school librarians on the front line, new technologies, and directors of leading libraries and research institutes. Working with the best in the marketplace, she brings a unique blend of editorial, sales, and marketing, as well as hardcore research and library skills. I'm so excited to have Dodie moderating today and joining us for this webinar. So over to you, Dodie.
Thank you, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here today with three new to me authors who are really excited to talk to you about their forthcoming books. We are scattered across the globe. We have Joseph in England, we have Charlene in the United States, and we have Jane in Australia, where she's getting her second wind right now. So without further ado, I'd like to move on and introduce Joseph Knox. Joseph is the author of Imposter Syndrome. In 2020, he became an Irish citizen, and maybe some of you are familiar with his debut, Sirens, and that was a bestseller that was translated into 18 different languages. The Smiling Man and The Sleepwalker are the second and third books in that trilogy, and his first standalone novel, Crime Story, was a Times #1 bestseller. Imposter Syndrome is his latest title, and it's more than just a typical story of a con man that gets have a ghost, but that doesn't mean you don't have a doppelganger. Joseph, why don't you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind Imposter Syndrome and how you created these characters?
Well, first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And hello to anyone watching, and of course to my fellow authors as well. I'm joining you from gloomy northern England this evening. For me, it might be the afternoon where you are. And I am the author so far of 5 novels. The first 3 were, I suppose, much more noir than what I've gone on to do. They were much more conventional in that sense. They owed a lot to Raymond Chandler, like a lot of young men who start out writing crime fiction. And after 3 books in that mode, I was just so hungry to do something else. And so the book I did after that was called True Crime Story. True Crime Story took most of its cues from true crime podcasts, and the entire book was presented in transcript form as the interviews with all of these people who were tangentially involved with the disappearance of a young woman. Now, all that to say, my 5th novel is, I suppose, an idea that kind of combines the two. It has that very driving, investigative, mysterious feeling of a sort of classic noir novel. But I think it's trying to tap into something much more contemporary, which is something that I learned really from, the true crime story novel. Imposter Syndrome itself is essentially about a con artist who has lost his confidence, which is a terrible position for him to be in. He arrives in London completely broke. He's coming from some kind of terrible breakup or some kind of bad personal situation that at the opening of the book he does not want to share with the reader at all. And because of this, he's really feeling this urge to change his life. He's tired of being a criminal. He's tired of ripping people off. And he looks around, I think, as well at the kind of grifters, hucksters, the con artists on the global stage, and almost feels disgusted to be associated with them. And so he's arriving in London feeling like he needs to change, but the only skills he has in life are those of a con artist. He's great at lying, great at stealing, great at doing funny voices and assuming characters, but he doesn't really know what that could possibly mean in the honest world. And then all of that is tested when he bumps into Bobby at the airport. And Bobby is the heiress from an incredibly wealthy oil dynasty. And when she runs into him, she momentarily confuses this con artist, his name is Lynch, with her brother, Hayden, who went missing in mysterious circumstances 5 years before. Now, they spend the rest of that night talking in an airport bar. And in the morning, Bobby is flying off to rehab. But Lynch, the next day, is drawn to her family home. And it's this incredible Chelsea mansion, upward of £30 million. And he just finds himself, I think, because he is coming from a completely different class to these people. He is working class. Of course, they're very affluent. And there is something about it that he just cannot resist in spite of himself. There, he meets Miranda, who is the matriarch of this wealthy family. She's a retired actor, and she sees the same resemblance in Lynch that her daughter did. So she looks at him and thinks, oh, you look quite close to my son who went missing all these years ago. Now, she has always suspected that there was foul play in her son's disappearance. His car was found abandoned on a bridge, and his body has never been recovered. And so she suggests that she hires Lynch to assume her son's identity. And so the idea is that he will pretend to be Hayden, he will dress like him, he will move around London. And Miranda's hope is that that will flush out his real killers, who might think, oh no, we didn't get the job done right the first time, or just need to investigate who this strange guy is saying that he's Hayden Pierce. And from there, really, Lynch assumes this guy's identity. He's using all of his con artistry to do so, but he does it quite nonchalantly. He doesn't believe for a second that this young man has been murdered. He's heard enough about him to learn that he's had his troubles. He's struggled with poor mental health and all of these things. And so he is convinced at first that this young man committed suicide. So he's very happy to take this check and pretend to be him in this upper class world for as long as it takes. The problem is that as soon as he assumes this guy's identity, he realizes quite quickly that he wasn't paranoid. He wasn't going off the rails. Someone really was manipulating this young man's life and everything he saw and interacted with. And now they're after Lynch. So that is really the opening premise to the novel, I suppose. But I would like to talk about a couple of the inspirations for the book as well. The first is quite funny. I was at a book festival in France, and usually most of my readers are women, and the kinds of men who like my books look like me. They're kind of weedy, they're kind of small, they're probably a little bit knock-kneed. They are librarians or they work in bookshops and things like that. I was a bookseller for 10 years, so those are my people. But this was a great big burly Scotsman, and he came over and he pumped my hand and he said, I'm such a great big fan of Sirens, and I said, oh, really? How did you find that book? And he said, well, my girlfriend Hate bought the book because she saw your author photo and decided that you must be some rich kid who's been handed a book deal. And all these strange assumptions about me, because she wanted to read the book and see how much she hated it and hated me. Now, luckily, she didn't have that experience. She really liked it. She recommended it to him. But it was that moment, I think, where I thought there's something kind of interesting in being mistaken for someone from a higher class. And I wonder if I could pass as that person. Now, I don't think I could. I have quite a broad accent. I'm not as good at doing voices as Lynch is, although I did do the audio book of Imposter Syndrome and had to do a lot of funny voices on the hoof, which was interesting. But it really got me thinking of this idea of a working class person wearing the clothes of a rich man, I suppose, and what would the circumstances be where that would be an interesting thriller. And so that was one premise. And then a lot of the energy animating the novel came from the corruption at the center of the city of London. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, I started reading much more about Russia and learning so much more about the complicity of the city of London, mainly in that they have laundered billions and billions and billions of pounds on behalf of the Russians in quite shady circumstances. And we know that this has happened with government collusion because there have also been 13 assassinations by the Russian government on British soil in the last couple of decades. Most people know about Litvinenko, who was poisoned with radioactive material, but there've been 13 in total, and a few high-profile attempts as well. So it's this hotbed of all of this dark, shady business espionage. And although the book itself does not deal with Russia-Ukraine, what it really does is try to go towards the heart of that corruption in London. And I suppose it operates in the milieu of, if I have no idea if I pronounced that word right, but it operates in the milieu of those kinds of people, the kinds of people who would be arms profiteering, who would be getting around sanctions to sell oil to disgraced countries and things like that, and basically looking out for themselves. Essentially, they are con artists on a global scale, is I suppose where the book is coming from. And that made it interesting and fun to see Lynch go up against them.
Thank you, Joseph. Plus, the whole time you're talking, I'm thinking everybody loves a con man with a conscience. So people will be dying to find out what Lynch finally does decide to do
Yes.
while he's enjoying the mansion. So, all right, our next speaker today is Charlene Carr. And Charlene, let me get my notes up here. Charlene grew up in a mixed race family in Toronto before moving to the Maritimes. After traveling the globe for several years and working at an array of mostly writing-related jobs, it was time to focus on her true love, novel writing. She has published 9, maybe 10 novels, I might have missed one, and has recently received grants from Arts Nova Scotia and the Canada Council for the Arts. Charlene currently lives in Nova Scotia with her husband and daughters. This is a very engaging story that she has whipped up for us. She got international acclaim with Hold My Girl, a page turner about a disastrous IVF mix-up. And now Rip the World Apart explores the lives of 3 generations of women in a mixed race family. We could call this a saga, I think, about identity, motherhood, and police brutality. Now I'm going to invite Charlene to come in and tell us a little bit more about her novel and her writing process. And I would like to hear a little bit about that cover if we have time too.
Sure. Thank you. And as you mentioned in my bio, I'm actually speaking to you from Nova Scotia, Canada, which is where a large part of the novel is set. And so I'll just go a little deeper into talking about We Ripped the World Apart to start. It's a moving and epic multi-timeline family story following the life of a young biracial woman pregnant with a child she isn't sure she wants, and really struggling to make sense of and find healing from the generational trauma passed down to her through her family's experience of the politically charged urban warfare that was going on in Jamaica in the 1980s, of Mulroney's war on drugs in Toronto, Canada, that happened a little after that, and in many ways was a war on Caribbean men, and the rise of anti-Black violence and racism that we're seeing today. And so, interspersed with learning about this young woman's life, we hear the story of her mother and her grandmother, and just all the secrets and lies and withholding that has harmed these women, as well as the ways in which finally admitting the truth can help each of them become the women, the people that they most want to be. And so, as you may have gleaned from what I've already said, it's a story that delves into questions about motherhood, race, loss, belonging, and the consequences of family secrets. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about the inspiration for this novel. I was walking one day and I started thinking about my paternal grandmother, who was from Jamaica. She lived in the mountains in a small village, and she died when my father was a young boy. And so, because of where she was and the time period, we don't even know how she died. My father remembers that she was ill for quite some time. There are no pictures of her. My father only has a few memories. And I just started really thinking, I wonder how different my father's life would have been, like through his upbringing, and then my family's life through kind of our journey, if she'd still existed, if we'd had this matriarch who was a connection to our heritage, to Jamaican culture in a way that I and my brothers really grew up without. And so around this time was when George Floyd was murdered. And it was as if the world, especially in North America, opened their eyes to the fact that racism still exists and systemic racism still exists. And people are living with that every day and realizing that anti-Black police racism is really a thing. And so I was seeing everyone talking about it on social media, and people that I had known for years started reaching out and asking me questions, very well-meaning, of course, but wanting to know how I was doing, how I was feeling with everything that was going on, and what it was like living as a Black woman in North America. And so, despite the fact that I appreciated their well-intentioned questions and kind of the care behind it, it was also really infuriating because I've dealt with racism my entire life. I've had many circumstances where, especially in Canada, I've heard people say, like, oh, racism doesn't exist here. Like, we're past that. And we're not at all. And so that got me really thinking how the families who had lost someone from anti-Black violence before George Floyd was murdered, and the world suddenly, they saw it happen. They couldn't turn away. They couldn't say, oh, he deserved it. He had it coming. I mean, some people said that, but you saw it in the video that, he wasn't fighting back. And this officer just chose to have all the control. And so I started thinking, what would it be like for families who are witnessing this now? And also, what would have been like them before this happened, when probably if something like this happened to a loved one of theirs, people would have expected that they must have done something to provoke it. And so I kind of merged those two ideas, and that's where the story for Rip the World Apart came from. And also, I know it's kind of interesting to hear sometimes about what the author infused from their own life. So the geographical journey of the family parallels the geographical journey of my family. My father, as I mentioned earlier, is a Black Jamaican. My mother is a white woman from Atlantic Canada. Like the characters in the story, she moved to Jamaica, met my father there, married, had their first two children. In the novel, it's just one son. And then moved to Canada right around the time of the Jamaican urban warfare. That's actually part of why they left, into this war on drugs that was a war on Caribbean men. And they're raising their mixed race Black sons in that environment. And then also, like the characters in the novel, they moved to Atlantic Canada later on to a predominantly white community. So the story is absolutely fictional. It's not out of fiction in any way, but there are these parallels. And a lot of the events in the novel and the emotions of the characters were drawn from real life experiences. Some personal, some that I heard about, some from, gleaning through research and the news. So as happened to the son in the book, my brothers have all been profiled by the police as well, sometimes just even a block or two from their homes. And I've experienced scenarios to some of the ones experienced by characters in the novel. And of course, a lot of the issues, as I mentioned, of racism, racial violence, and the fight against that could really just be stripped from the headlines. But the thing that I want to kind of leave you with regarding the book, and this is an aspect that wasn't initially part of my plans for the story, is this idea or theme of belonging. And so it's something that readers keep telling me really resonates with them, and they bring up the story, and I can just see it in their eyes how much that's what they held on to. So Karila, the main character in the novel, is biracial. She's trying to understand who she is as a person who isn't quite Black, but certainly isn't white, and who in a way is both and neither. So she grows up kind of on the outs without real community because of what happened to her brother, him being murdered by police. And as a result, her parents really checked out. They kind of stopped raising her. And socially, she was considered on the outs as well, a bit of a pariah, because how do you interact with someone who's gone through such trauma? So first for being the sister of this boy who was murdered, and then when they moved to Atlanta, Canada, she's the only Black girl in a totally white community. So throughout the novel, we just see this real longing in her to belong, to find community and connection. And I think that everyone can experience that or can relate to it, whether even if you're, in junior high, trying to find out what group you really fit into. And so as I keep hearing from readers, that yearning, that desire to belong is what they're talking about and what's really pulling them into the story and keeps them reading, keeps them turning the pages. And I imagine that that's what will pull readers in who come to your libraries if you're talking about this book. Something that I think just all of us can really see ourselves in. And so just before I finish, I want to talk to you about some read-alikes, because of course, people like to know, well, if I liked this book, other books will I like? So from what I've been told, David Cheriandi's brother is, if you like that one, you'll probably enjoy We Rip the World Apart, as well Britt Bennett's The Vanishing Half, and Charmaine Wilkerson's Black Cake, as well as her upcoming novel Good Dirt, which I just had the privilege of reading and is just wonderful book. And it happens to release the same day as We Rip the World Apart, funnily enough. And so all of these authors, like I do when We Rip the World Apart, also explore the notion of belonging, specifically as it relates to race, as well as themes of biracialism, anti-Black violence, and both Brother and Black Cake explore the immigrant experience. And actually, just before I stop, because you mentioned talking about the cover, it's really special to me because this painting was done by a Nova Scotian artist, and it's actually set in the north end of Halifax, which is where a large part of the novel is set. So I was thrilled when my publishers suggested this cover. Yeah.
I love it. I kind of thought for a minute you were going to say, this was my house. And it's great to support a Nova Scotian artist as well. One quick question I have for you before we go on to Jane is a couple of reviews that I've seen of the book mention that your dialogue and your internal monologues are very strong in this book. Which is harder for you to write?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I struggle particularly with any of them, but I guess I'll say dialogue, because oftentimes the internal monologue is where I kind of go on, and then revision, I need to pull back. Like my editor has sometimes said, cut out some of the thinky stuff, where the characters are just kind of thinking and ruminating. And so I think that's maybe easier in the sense that it just flows out of me, and then I have to prune it back.
I'm just really looking forward to reading the entire book in one sitting.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Charlene. Let's jump on to Jane so we can get an inside on the Lotus shoes. Jane is publishing with Park Row, as you can see below. This is her debut, not only as a book, but this is her debut webcast. So, Jane, now you are going to be seasoned. You'll see how easy these are, and these other authors will inspire you as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live, and your inspiration behind the Lotus Shoes?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, firstly, I want to say that I'm really excited and so grateful to be invited to this event. I was a migrant child from a struggling family. My dad worked most of his life in a die casting factory, and mum sewed garments for as little as 50 cents a piece. So, really, there wasn't much money for fun things, but luckily, libraries are free. I went there all the time as soon as I learned to read English. I arrived in Australia when I was 7, and I have such fond memories of libraries and librarians. Um, as Dodie mentioned, this is my debut, so I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my journey to publication and how my experience and a bit of my personality, how it's influenced the development of the main character, Little Flower. She's a mujay, which is a Cantonese word for a slave maid. So, despite my passion for stories, I didn't start writing until I met my husband. I would like to use an analogy to help you understand my mindset. So, I've got some friends who really love window shopping. They love to go and browse in haute couture boutiques like Chanel or Hermes, even if they can't afford anything. Whereas I never visit places that are out of reach. These window shoppers will tell me that it makes them happy to try on clothes, to imagine a life of luxury. For them, this habit is fun and motivating. But sadly for me, it's the opposite. And I often think, but I never do say it out loud, is what's the point? And that's how it was with writing. So, growing up poor, I was terrified of poverty. Um, in my childhood, throughout my childhood, there were lots of rows between my parents about bills, the cost of food, uniform, the upkeep of our very, very small and dilapidated weatherboard house. So, since the pursuit of writing was unthinkable, I kind of never tried, never even daydreamed about it, because for me, dwelling on something that I couldn't have would make reality harder to bear. I needed a secure job and a regular income, so I pursued a career in the health sciences. And I've inserted this part of myself into the Lotus Shoes. So when someone asks about her dreams, Little Flower says that she keeps them pruned like a punjoi, which is a Cantonese word for bonsai. But my husband, on the other hand, is a level headed dreamer. By this, I mean, he doesn't think sheer willpower can turn me into a singer because I can't carry a tune even if a publishing contract depends on it. But he does believe in me and encourage me to write. So without him, I wouldn't be here. There wouldn't be the Lotus Shoes. Before I delve into my inspiration for the Lotus Shoes, I'll just give you a brief summary of the story. So, at 6 years old, Little Flower is sold into Lin Jing's wealthy family to become a mujay, a slave maid. So, at that time, having bound feet was a sign of class and respectability, and only the poorest women had natural feet. Out of jealousy for Little Flower's ladylike bound feet and talent for embroidery, Lin Jing makes sure that she can never leave her to ascend into society. Over the years, the girls, by turns, tend to be friends and rivals until scandal strikes the family and their fortunes are suddenly reversed. So it's a story about women's struggles and triumph in a world where they're so starved of power. And it also explores the importance of equality within relationships, whether it would be friends or lovers. I believe you can't really have a meaningful relationship unless there is more or less a balance of power. The Lotus Shoes is inspired by family stories from old China where both my grandmothers grew up. So on dad's side, my mama often told me about Autumn Moon, her grand aunt. She lived in the same era as Little Flower and Lin Jing. Autumn Moon was also really good at embroidery, and this allowed her to marry into a genteel family despite not having bound feet. This alliance lifted many of her female relatives' marriage prospects too. But on my mum's side, my pawpaw was far less fortunate. Her father abandoned her family when she was still young. She was the youngest, so her mum, and siblings, they all had to rely on the charity of her uncles. Pawpaw was desperate to go to school, but education was only reserved for sons. With this upbringing, my pawpaw resented the patriarchy, and she would have joined a celibate sisterhood. These were communities where women rejected marriages um, and pulled in their money, their wages, so that they could be independent collectively. This feminist movement is central to the second half of the Lotus Shoes. But for my papa, by the time she was born in 1930, most of these sisterhoods were already on the decline. So, in addition to putting a bit of myself into creating Little Flower, at the time when I was writing The Lotus Shoes, many of the historical fiction I read had very outspoken female leads who all often also rejected all traditional feminine expectations. Whilst those character arcs are really captivating, I wanted to create a character who would be more relatable to quieter personalities, more closer to myself and my friends. Someone who leans into tradition but isn't bound by it. I wanted a woman who's brave and strong, but also reserved at the same time. And that's Little Flower. On the other hand, with Lin Jing, despite her many flaws, I have a lot of sympathy for her too. In a world where having bound feet was indispensable, her lack of them made her feel very insecure. She also craves affection and approval from her mother, but nothing Lin Jing does seems to be good enough. There is no doubt Lin Jing could and should be kinder to Little Flower, but she's not beyond redemption. Now, in the world of the Lotus Shoes, destiny and superstition is pretty much a part of everyday life. I've got a serendipity story to tell too, so, with regarding the research for the Lotus Shoes. So I was in Guangzhou with my husband. Guangzhou is where most of the story is set in southern China. I wanted to do some research into the celibate sisterhood. I was really keen to find one of these original sanctuaries where they live. They were all known as the Hall of Eternal Purity. But the trouble is, it's not that easy to find things on the internet when it's in China because they don't use Google, for example, they use Baidu. Anyway, so I only had the name of the place. I thought, we'll give it a shot. I talked to the hotel receptionist. To my surprise, she said, "Oh, it's so easy. You just take the bullet train to Sundak, just show the name to any taxi driver, and they'll take you there." So at Sundak Station, we did find a very enthusiastic young driver who confidently said, "Sure, no problems. 15, 20 minutes, I'll get you there." An hour later, we're still on the road. Now, I don't speak that much Mandarin, and he couldn't really understand Cantonese. So I had to make a long distance call to my mum back in Australia, who she's fluent in both Chinese dialects. And together, somehow they found a vague address. So the taxi driver went to the nearest police station, and the police was really nice. He actually guided us there on his motorbike. So we get there, and I think, great, this is amazing. But it was locked. And there was a sign that said, "We got to go to the Bruce Lee theme park to find a tour guide with a key." And I'm thinking, is there really such a place? Anyway, off we went. To my amazement, the tour guide was there and she spoke Cantonese, super enthusiastic as well. And she took me back. We toured the place. So it's like it's no longer functional, but they've preserved it. It's sort of like a museum in a sense. So I found lots of inspiration there, which I wrote into the Low Shoes. And there was a 90-year-old celibate sister there who was happy to be interviewed and spoke Cantonese. So that was great. And then afterwards, our streak of good luck continued. The taxi driver took us to a place called the Nam Gok Sido Silk Museum, and where we had a private tour of exhibits, and the surrounding estate was landscaped like a silkworm cultivation village. And they also had this amazing gallery full of really exquisite embroidery, the type that I would imagine Little Flower would produce. So ever since then, I've been convinced that the Lotus Shoes is a story destined to be told. So, and I think fans of Girl with a Pearl Earring, Memoirs of a Geisha, and a more recent book, The Familiar by Lee Bardogo, will very likely enjoy the Lotus Shoes as well. Lastly, I want to let you know that I've been uploading short videos on my Instagram page, um, that gives readers a visual tour into the world of the Lotus Shoes. So they feature accessories or just items that are in the book, such as this fan, which is decorated with double-sided embroidery. And that's it.
I love that story of like just heading off into the wilderness with a well-intentioned taxi driver. One other read-alike I want to add to your list too that I thought of as you were speaking is The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane by Lisa See, because it has similar dual timelines, and it uses silk and fabric as a way to get out of poverty as well. And I'm sure the writing is just as beautiful, or your writing is just as beautiful as Lisa See's. So I also was not aware of the feminist aspect of the celibate sisterhood. That is a really fascinating part of the story that I'm looking forward to getting to. Jane, would you mind saying what your Instagram handle is?
Oh, yes. So it's just add Jane Yang Writing, all one word with no space.
And Charlene and Joseph, if you have Instagram handles, if you want to jump in, go ahead, Charlene.
Yeah, mine is Charlene Carr Author. So again, no spaces, just Charlene Carr Author. And that's actually where I'm most active as far as socials go.
Great. And Joseph?
Mine is it's KNOBBTH, Knob, for whatever reason, but you will find me there.
I know from investigating Instagram handles for a book buzz that I do that sometimes it's not as obvious as Jane Yang. So a lot of authors do that, author Jane Yang or Jane Yang author or Charlene Carr writes, or so it's useful for our attendees to be able to know where to find you. Now, I'm wondering if any of you, we have a few minutes. I'm wondering if any of you have questions for each other.
I'm curious, Jane. So, and forgive me if I missed it as you were speaking, but was the trip that you took specifically for research, or were you already on the trip and you just kind of melded that in? I'm especially curious where it's your debut.
It was part of a trip for fun. Because I not knowing exactly where it was, I couldn't commit the budget to go if it was just for that. But I did go to Shanghai as well because part of the stories there. Yeah, it was part of a leisure trip, so it was good that it all worked out.
Yeah, great way to intermingle work and pleasure.
I think your accountant would rather you say that you went there for research. So
it's too many years ago now. I don't think it's claimable anymore.
Oh, darn. Joseph, one question I had for you. Was that a new experience for you to be narrating your own book?
Well, the previous book I did called True Crime Story, which, as I mentioned, has all these interviews interspersed. In that book, Joseph Knox is a character, because what I was really trying to do with that book was make it convincingly look like a true crime book. And so it has photographs and documents and all of these kinds of things. And the photographs, if you look in the legalese at the beginning of the book, they're all attributed to characters in the book and all of that stuff. So when it came to the audiobook, I read as myself, but it was very small amount really for that one. And I was really terrified that they would fire me from being Joseph Knox, you know, if I was rubbish. And so when I did that, it had been a couple of years when it was time to do imposter syndrome, and I think I had forgotten that actually it was quite difficult just to do that small amount. And so I boldly said I would do the whole book, forgetting that, of course, it's filled with female characters, people from London who have a completely different accent to me, and that, of course, a lot of the book is about convincingly doing those accents. So I had to at least make an effort. So it was much more difficult. It was supposed to take 4 days. It took 6.
I'm impressed it only took 6.
Well,
Yeah,
all,
that's
all
not
I
bad
would
at all.
all I say to anyone interested in the audiobook is listen to the preview first. You know?
Well, I'm sure you at least had to take a couple sips of water in those 6 days, but that does sound like a Herculean effort. And then one observation really I have for Charlene, and maybe you want to talk about it a little bit. I think it's interesting that your previous book was about IVF, and then this book focuses a lot on reproductive rights, which are two things that we're hearing a lot about right now in the United States. Did one thing kind of feed the other?
I don't think so. No. So my previous book, Hold My Girl, it was actually inspired by personal experience in giving birth to my daughter via IVF and being very nervous for the first 6 to 8 months that they had made a mistake and the eggs were switched, which is what happens in this novel. And yeah, I mean, the only thing that I can really think is infertility was a part of my life and fertility treatments and all of that for probably a decade. So just reproduction and ideas behind that and control, how little control women often have about getting pregnant. And then the flip side, when, you know, there's the option of not wanting to be pregnant and how that plays in. And if you've already become pregnant and what you're going to do about it. So I think maybe that's where those themes came in, but it certainly wasn't intentional. But yes, as you mentioned, I think with, you know, all that I hear going on in the States right now, that both of these books will just really resonate with readers.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to let Elenita take us out, but I think everybody attending today and those that are going to listen to this archive have learned a lot about your books and a little bit about each one of you as well. And I thank all of you authors for putting up with my questions. And I thank your publishers for making it available for this webcast. And I'm going to turn it over to Elenita. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you
Thank
for
you.
the publishers and for you.
Thank you.
Hayden. Am I muted? No, I'm not. Books are available through Brodart, and this is recorded. Each one of the authors will get a recording, and also all of the registrants for the webinar will get a recording. And if you want to share it, it will also be on the Brodart YouTube site. So thank you very much, and we will say goodbye for now.